Do you truly understand what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, or has the real story of these cities been obscured over time? The account of Sodom and Gomorrah is one of the most famous in the Bible, but what we've been taught is often a simplified, distorted version shaped by centuries of interpretation. In this exploration, we'll uncover the mysteries behind the destruction of these cities and examine layers of meaning that are often overlooked. Was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah solely about homosexuality, as many have been led to believe, or is there a deeper story with lessons that can reshape our understanding of society and morality? To truly grasp the story, we must begin by situating Sodom and Gomorrah within their historical and geographical context. These cities were located in the southeastern region of Canaan near the Dead Sea, an area now barren but once thriving. At the time, Sodom and Gomorrah were prosperous hubs along a key trade route between Egypt and Mesopotamia, benefiting from fertile lands and rich natural resources. However, this prosperity masked a darker reality. The cities were known for their moral and social decay, rejecting principles of justice and hospitality vital for the survival of ancient communities. In ancient times, cities were judged not just by their wealth, but by their role in upholding justice and morality. Sodom and Gomorrah, despite their riches, were infamous for violence, selfishness, and neglect of the vulnerable, including foreigners and the poor. The true tragedy of Sodom and Gomorrah lies in their failure to uphold essential values, prioritizing fleeting pleasures and indulgence over compassion and solidarity. Their downfall reflects a society that prospered materially but collapsed morally, offering timeless lessons about the consequences of ignoring fundamental principles of justice and humanity. Let's dive deeper into the historical context, hidden messages in Scripture, and what the Bible truly says about these cities. Prepare to challenge traditional interpretations and discover the untold story of Sodom and Gomorrah, a narrative that continues to inspire reflection across the world. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is often portrayed as a divine judgment on cities primarily because of sexual sins, especially homosexuality. This narrative, shaped by centuries of religious interpretation, suggests that the city's depravity was so severe that God sent angels to warn Lot, a righteous man living in Sodom, before destroying the cities with fire and sulfur. The story of Lot and the angels, where the city's inhabitants attempt to harm heavenly visitors, is frequently interpreted as evidence of deviant sexual behavior. As a result, many believe the primary sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was rooted in homosexuality. This view, popularized by preachers and scholars throughout history, has been used to condemn sexual practices that fall outside traditional religious norms. However, this simplified interpretation overlooks the broader context of the biblical narrative. A deeper examination reveals that the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah extend beyond sexual immorality. The Bible does not explicitly identify homosexuality as the central sin leading to the city's destruction. Instead, the account highlights a pattern of social and spiritual failures far more complex than a single act. The sins of Sodom and Gomorrah included a lack of hospitality, mistreatment of strangers, violence, and oppression of the poor, themes that are clearly reflected in the text but often overshadowed by an overemphasis on sexuality. This narrow interpretation diverts attention from the deeper societal decay and injustices that marked these cities. To fully grasp the meaning behind their destruction, it is essential to move beyond traditional views and examine the multifaceted corruption present in Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 18 and 19 offer a detailed account of their moral and social collapse, emphasizing widespread injustice, cruelty, and disregard for the vulnerable. Contrary to popular belief, the original text focuses less on specific sexual acts and more on the broader issues of violence and oppression. A careful reading of the biblical narrative uncovers a richer and more nuanced understanding of the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah, one that underscores systemic injustice and societal decay rather than a single isolated behavior. This passage reflects Genesis 18:20-21, where God declares that the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is immense and their sin is very serious. Rather than being centered solely on a specific sexual transgression, The severity of Sodom and Gomorrah's sin is tied to the brutal behavior of their society, particularly toward the vulnerable and unprotected. A closer look at Genesis 19 reveals that the sin of Sodom is evident in the way its residents treat foreigners. When angels arrive in the city disguised as men, the residents' first reaction is to violate the visitors, showing a profound disregard for hospitality, a cornerstone of ancient cultural values. The men's attempt to abuse the visitors is not merely a sexual issue, but a clear demonstration of violence, disrespect, and inhumanity. In the cultural mindset of the time, offering hospitality and safeguarding strangers was one of the highest moral duties. Lot's attempt to protect the angels, even by making the troubling offer of his daughters, underscores his desperate efforts to uphold hospitality and preserve the honor of his home. This act, while disturbing to modern readers, reflects the weight given to the protection of guests in his society. The response of Sodom's residents, however, represents a complete rejection of these values. The actions of the people of Sodom reveal a systemic failure far beyond individual morality. Their treatment of the weak, foreigners, and the poor signifies a society corrupted by selfishness, violence, and oppression. The sin of Sodom and Gomorrah lies in the widespread abandonment of justice, hospitality, and respect for others. Their destruction was not merely a punishment for isolated sins, but a consequence of a civilization that ignored fundamental moral principles. Lot's role in the narrative highlights his righteousness amidst the corruption of Sodom. When the angels sent by God arrive, it is Lot who welcomes them, offering shelter and protection. This contrasts sharply with the city's inhabitants, who seek to exploit and harm the visitors. The contrast between Lot's actions and those of the men of Sodom underscores a key lesson of the story: the importance of hospitality and the protection of the vulnerable as essential principles in ancient society. Testament culture is contrasted with the violence and lack of respect shown by the inhabitants of the city. Lot not only welcomes the angels into his home, but also risks his life to ensure their safety, even in the face of a threatening crowd. However, Lot's actions also raise complex moral questions. In a moment of desperation, he offers his 2 virgin daughters to the men of the city in exchange for the safety of his guests. This disturbing gesture must be understood within the cultural context of the time, where the honor of a household and the protection of guests were paramount, often above all else. While incomprehensible by modern standards, Lot's offer reflects an extreme attempt to uphold the values of hospitality and protection in an environment where these principles were nearly extinct. Lot's story also sheds light on the moral blindness of a society that has lost its sense of right and wrong. His steadfast defense of the angels, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, highlights his resistance, however solitary, to the moral collapse of Sodom. His actions starkly contrast with the widespread degradation of the city's inhabitants who had succumbed to selfish and destructive behavior. Lot's willingness to protect the heavenly visitors, despite the pervasive corruption around him, underscores the degree of societal decay. When God, through his angels, provides Lot and his family the opportunity to escape, their flight becomes a metaphor for leaving behind moral decay. The command not to look back symbolizes the need to sever ties with a corrupt past. Lot's wife, however, disobeys and looks back, turning into a pillar of salt. This moment is deeply symbolic, illustrating her inability to detach from the old ways and values of Sodom, even as the city faced destruction. Her fate serves as a stark reminder that true liberation requires not only physical escape, but also spiritual detachment from a corrupted past. Lot's escape represents a beacon of hope amid chaos, showing that even in the most depraved societies, redemption is possible for the righteous. However, the story also highlights the difficulty of personal transformation. Lot's wife's failure to embrace change reflects the inner struggle against the temptation to cling to destructive habits and deny the necessity of renewal. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah stands as one of the Bible's most dramatic and impactful episodes, illustrating both the consequences of moral decay and the enduring possibility of redemption for those who choose righteousness. The biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah is strikingly vivid. Fire and sulfur rain down from heaven, consuming the cities and everything within them in an instant. At first glance, this devastating event may appear to be a direct and relentless punishment for sin. However, upon closer examination, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah reveals deeper meanings in both historical and symbolic contexts. God's actions are not a simple response to isolated acts of disobedience, but rather the culmination of a process of moral and social decay. Sodom has become a symbol of a civilization that, by abandoning foundational principles such as justice, equity, and hospitality, has become unsustainable. The fire and sulfur, often seen as signs of divine punishment, can also be interpreted as representations of a purifying force, eliminating the deep-seated corruption within a society that had failed to uphold its integrity. In destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, God does more than punish sin. He removes a civilization that had become irreversibly corrupt. This destruction is not an act of revenge, but a reflection of the inevitable consequences of forsaking the values that sustain any society. It serves as a profound warning about the collapse that follows when collective morality disintegrates and oppression and violence become normalized. The metaphor of fire and sulfur illustrates that the foundations of a corrupt civilization cannot withstand the radical purification required for renewal. It also emphasizes a process of divine judgment and separation between the righteous and the wicked, an idea echoed throughout biblical narratives. Some modern interpretations suggest that the events might have a natural explanation, such as a volcanic eruption or a meteoritic impact near the Dead Sea. While these scientific perspectives do not diminish the spiritual significance of the event, they demonstrate how morality and natural phenomena can intertwine in powerful ways. Ultimately, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah transcends the physical destruction of cities. It carries enduring symbolism as a cautionary tale about the consequences of societal deviation from justice and solidarity. The destruction represents not only the end of a physical civilization, but also the spiritual demise of a people who have lost their way. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah transcends its historical and biblical context to serve as a powerful moral lesson. The cities, consumed by fire and sulfur, symbolize the inevitable destruction of societies steeped in corruption. Their fall reminds us that a society's survival depends on upholding values that promote justice, compassion, and human coexistence. Sodom and Gomorrah's legacy is not merely a tale of divine punishment, but a profound reflection on morality, social justice, and the importance of empathy and hospitality. Even after their destruction, the names of these cities endure as symbols of sin and corruption. Across cultures and religions, they serve as cautionary examples of how unchecked immorality and societal decay can lead to collapse. However, the lessons of Sodom and Gomorrah extend beyond warnings against specific sins. Scholars have increasingly emphasized that their downfall was rooted not only in acts of immorality, but also in the failure to protect the most vulnerable. The lack of hospitality to strangers and neglect of the poor were pivotal failures that sealed their fate. This broader understanding reveals that their sins encompassed issues of social justice, oppression, and the violation of basic human rights. In many religious traditions, particularly Judaism and Christianity, Sodom and Gomorrah are portrayed as examples of divine judgment on moral corruption. Yet, their destruction also underscores the consequences of societies that abandon foundational principles of justice and humanity. The story challenges us to consider how long we can tolerate injustice, inequality, and cruelty before facing similar consequences. The legacy of these lost cities also urges us to reflect on our own capacity for compassion and solidarity. Lot's resistance to the pervasive corruption of his city, as he sought to protect the visiting angels, exemplifies moral courage and ethical action. His actions remind us that even in the darkest times, there is room for integrity and the preservation of human values. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah continues to resonate as a timeless call to uphold justice, care for the vulnerable, and strive for a society rooted in empathy and ethical principles. It serves as both a warning and an inspiration, urging us to build a world that honors the dignity of all its members. In the narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot stands as the sole figure of virtue, a beacon of morality alongside his family in a decaying society. His presence reminds us that goodness can endure even in the most corrupt environments, but it requires active defense and protection to survive. The legacy of these ancient cities is not merely a warning against sin, but an invitation to examine how our values and behaviors shape the destiny of society. The downfall of Sodom illustrates that any civilization neglecting justice, empathy, and the rights of others risks self-destruction. The biblical story offers an urgent lesson: to safeguard the common good, care for the vulnerable, and ensure society does not fall into selfishness and indifference. Sodom and Gomorrah stand as eternal reminders of the necessity for a just and humanitarian society, where compassion, hospitality, and goodness are not optional but fundamental principles for coexistence and prosperity. Far from being solely a tale of divine destruction, The story of Sodom and Gomorrah highlights the failures of a society that abandoned its most essential values. Its dramatic imagery of fire and sulfur serves as a metaphor for the inevitable collapse that occurs when civilizations forsake principles of justice and care for the vulnerable in favor of selfish and destructive interests. The sins of Sodom and Gomorrah were not confined to any single act. According to the biblical account, their destruction stemmed from neglecting justice, compassion, and solidarity. The lack of hospitality, violence against strangers, and oppression of the poor and vulnerable marked the moral decay of these cities. This broader context challenges traditional interpretations and encourages reflection on the deeper societal and spiritual failures depicted in the story. Today, the narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah serves as a stark warning to modern societies. It compels us to ask critical questions. What values are we cultivating? Are we creating a society that is fair and welcoming, especially to those most in need? The story challenges us to confront our own humanity and consider the consequences of growing social disparities and diminishing rights. Sodom and Gomorrah teach us that the survival and prosperity of any society depend on its commitment to justice, empathy, and hospitality. The lessons of these ancient cities resonate through time, urging us to uphold values that protect the vulnerable and foster unity, ensuring that our civilization does not share their tragic fate. The most vulnerable in society are often overlooked, raising the question, are we on a path similar to ancient cities like Sodom and Gomorrah? Yet amidst this sobering reflection, there is a message of hope. Just as Lot and his family escaped destruction, there remains a way to redemption and transformation. History does not merely condemn a fallen civilization, but highlights the potential for change when hope and the pursuit of justice endure. Through Lot's example, we see that resisting evil, upholding righteous principles, and protecting those who seek goodness is still possible, even in a corrupted world. The lesson of Sodom and Gomorrah reminds us that no matter how deeply entrenched evil appears, there is always a chance to preserve what is just. This story underscores the profound impact of individual and societal choices, emphasizing that ignoring fairness, compassion, and humanity can lead to self-destruction. What we learn from the lost cities is that morality and justice must guide our actions. Neglecting these foundational principles of peaceful and equitable coexistence risks leading us down the same destructive path. By remembering the history of Sodom and Gomorrah, we are called to work toward a more just and compassionate world for all. The tale of these ancient cities resonates beyond the past, confronting us with enduring societal challenges. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, often seen as divine punishment, is a stark reflection of human failure, a society that abandoned justice, compassion, and hospitality. Their sin was not limited to individual moral failings, but was a scathing critique of a social system that ignored the rights and needs of the most vulnerable. This systemic failure led to their inevitable collapse. Reflecting on this story, we must ask ourselves, how do we treat others, especially those most in need of our help? The message is clear. A society that disregards justice, neglects solidarity, and allows oppression and violence to prevail is destined for failure. History challenges us to act boldly against injustice, just as Lot did when he sought to protect the vulnerable. In a world where social inequalities and injustices persist, let us remember that even small acts of courage and compassion can make a difference. Every act of kindness, every gesture of solidarity, and every effort to help others has the potential to create meaningful change. Change does not occur without active participation. It is essential that, as individuals, we strive to be models of virtue and justice in our daily lives. The story of Lot and his family reminds us that redemption is possible, even in the most challenging situations. Lot's escape from the ruined cities of Sodom and Gomorrah symbolizes our ability to rise above corruption and seek a more ethical and just path, no matter the circumstances surrounding us. This transformation begins within each of us, through the way we treat others and the values we choose to uphold. When reflecting on the history of Sodom and Gomorrah, it is not enough to lament their destruction. Instead, we must ask ourselves what actions we can take to prevent our own societies from descending into moral decay. The true lesson lies in practicing justice, caring for those in need, and maintaining compassion, even when faced with adversity. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah serves as an invitation for each of us to take an active role in building a better, fairer world. It challenges us to examine our daily lives and consider, what are we doing to make our communities more just and welcoming? How can we apply the lessons of Sodom and Gomorrah to ensure that our societies avoid a similar fate? Let us reflect on these questions and, more importantly, take action so that the values of justice, hospitality, and solidarity can thrive in our world. If you found value in exploring the profound lessons of Sodom and Gomorrah, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here you'll discover more content like this, deep dives into biblical stories and reflections that can transform how you understand the scriptures. Don't forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss our latest studies. Know someone who might benefit from these teachings? Share this video with them. Together, we can grow, exchange ideas, and foster enriching discussions about the wisdom the Bible offers for our modern world. Let's spread knowledge and encourage meaningful conversations. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share with friends. Let's continue this journey of deepening our understanding of God's Word and its relevance to our lives today. See you in the next video. Until then, may the lessons of Sodom and Gomorrah inspire us all to create a fairer, more compassionate, and thoughtful society.